This story revolves around a woman pale as death, whose presence not only haunts the walls of a building, but also the souls of those who see her. It all began in a quiet, unremarkable apartment building on the outskirts of a small town. The building, though well-maintained, carried an air of decay. Jack Harris, the building's longtime manager, had worked there for years without incident. He was used to the creaking floors, the dim hallways, and the flickering lights. But one cold, rainy night would change everything. It was a particularly dreary evening, with rain pattering against the windows. Jack was finishing up paperwork in his office when a young tenant burst in, her dog dragging her along. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. She clutched the leash tightly, her hands shaking.
I saw something. On the 3rd floor, there was a woman. She was just standing there.
Jack, used to the usual complaints about noise or faulty appliances, furrowed his brow. A woman? Visitors were rare in this building, and he knew almost all the residents.
What did she look like?
So pale, long black hair. She was standing at the end of the hallway, staring at the wall. I've never seen her before.
Jack's first thought was that it was a visitor, but the more the tenant described her, the stillness, the ghostly pallor, the more unsettled he became. Something about it just didn't sit right with him. He promised to check it out. Jack wasn't the type to jump to conclusions. He decided to head down to the basement where the building's security footage was kept. The system was old, with grainy black and white monitors that flickered as they played. He rewound the tape from the 3rd floor camera. For a while, there was nothing but the usual stillness of the dimly lit hallway. And then there she was, a woman pale as death, standing motionless at the far end of the hall. Just like the tenant had said. Her body didn't move. It hovered, as if her feet barely touched the ground. Jack leaned closer, squinting at the monitor, and Thina. The woman's head twitched. Just a slight movement, as if she was turning to look directly at the camera. Jack recoiled from the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't right.
What the hell?
Before he could react, the screen flickered and went dark. Jack blinked, unsure of what he had just seen. He shook his head, convincing himself it was a glitch. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. Chapter 3: The 3rd Floor Investigation. Determined to investigate, Jack grabbed his flashlight and headed to the 3rd floor. The elevator creaked as it climbed, and when the doors opened, he was met with an eerie silence. The hallway was dimly lit, the flickering lights casting long, shifting shadows on the walls. He stepped out, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. The air was thick with an unnatural chill. Jack could see his breath in the cold air. His flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the cracked paint on the walls and the worn carpet beneath his feet.
It's probably nothing. Maybe just a prank.
But as Jack approached the spot where the woman had stood in the footage, a cold dread settled in his chest. The air here felt even colder, and a faint, sickly sweet smell lingered in the air. His flashlight flickered briefly as he neared the end of the hall. And then he saw her. She stood at the far end of the hallway, her long black hair hanging limply over her shoulders, her face obscured by shadows. Jack's breath caught in his throat. She was exactly as the tenant had described, pale, deathly pale.
Hey, who are you? What are you doing here?
The woman didn't respond. She didn't even move. She just stood there, staring at him with eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. For a brief moment, Jack considered turning around and leaving, but something kept him rooted to the spot. A strange, inexplicable urge to approach her. He took a step forward, and then another. But as he got closer, the woman began to move. Slowly, she turned her head, revealing a face that was not human. Her eyes were hollow, dark pits, and her mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. Jack froze, paralyzed by fear. And then, without warning, the woman disappeared. She simply vanished into thin air. Chapter 4: The Disappearance of Mr. Thompson. The following day, things took a darker turn. Mr. Thompson, one of the building's maintenance workers, arrived for his shift. Jack had known Thompson for years, a quiet, reliable man who rarely spoke more than a few words. But today, something was different. Thompson seemed on edge, his eyes darting around nervously as he entered the building. Jack greeted him, but Thompson barely acknowledged him. He mumbled something about needing to check the rooftop.
"There's something wrong up there. I need to check it out."
Jack watched as Thompson disappeared into the stairwell. An hour passed then, too. When Thompson still hadn't returned, Jack began to worry. He called out, but there was no answer. Later that afternoon, 2 more maintenance workers arrived, asking if Jack had seen their boss. Jack told them about Thompson's strange behavior and how he had gone to the roof hours ago, but hadn't come back down. They searched the building from top to bottom, the rooftop, the stairwells, even the basement. But Thompson was gone. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. There was no trace of him, no clue as to where he had gone. Later that night, Jack reviewed the security footage again. There on the screen was Thompson ascending the stairs. But as Jack watched closely, he noticed someone following him. A shadowy figure, just out of sight, trailing behind him. It was the pale woman. Chapter 5: The Woman Returns. That night, after the building had gone quiet and the tenants had gone to bed, Jack sat in his office, staring blankly at the security monitors. His thoughts raced about the woman, about Thompson, about the strange things that had been happening in the building. His gut told him that something was horribly wrong, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. As Jack watched the grainy footage of the empty hallways, something caught his eye. The third-floor camera flickered, and for a brief moment, he saw her. The pale woman, standing motionless in the middle of the hallway. Her face was turned away from the camera, but Jack knew it was her. His heart raced as he leaned closer to the monitor.
She's back.
Suddenly, the camera feed flickered again, and the woman was gone. But before Jack could react, the camera outside his office door activated. There, standing just a few feet from the door, was the pale woman. Her hollow eyes stared directly into the camera. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Jack could feel the cold sweat on the back of his neck. The woman's face, though expressionless, seemed to carry a sinister weight, as if her presence alone was enough to send waves of dread through the building. Jack's mind raced. Should he leave? Should he confront her? His body froze, unable to make a decision. The pale woman didn't move. She simply stood there, staring at the camera. And then, with agonizing slowness, she began to walk down the hallway, her bare feet barely making a sound on the floor. Jack's hand trembled as he reached for his flashlight. 6. Following her down the stairwell. Unable to resist, Jack grabbed his flashlight and cautiously opened the office door. The hallway outside was eerily silent. The air was colder than usual, and Jack could see his breath as he stepped out. His flashlight beam wavered as he followed the woman down the dimly lit corridor. His footsteps echoed in the silence, and as he neared the stairwell, he felt the air grow even colder. The woman's figure disappeared around the corner, but Jack continued to follow her, his heart pounding in his chest. As he descended the stairs, the darkness seemed to close in around him. His flashlight flickered, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. The farther down he went, the more disoriented he became. The walls seemed to shift, the floor felt uneven beneath his feet. Jack had never been to the building's lowest level before. It wasn't in use, and as far as he knew, it had been sealed off for years. But as he reached the bottom of the stairwell, he found the door to the basement ajar. Chapter 7: The Forgotten Basement. The basement was different from the rest of the building. The walls were made of rough stone, and the air was thick with the smell of damp earth. Jack's flashlight flickered as he stepped inside. The floor was covered in dust, and old, forgotten boxes lined the walls. He had the unsettling feeling that he wasn't supposed to be there. As Jack swept his flashlight across the room, he saw something strange, a large wooden door at the far end of the basement. It was old, much older than the rest of the building, and it had strange symbols carved into the wood. The symbols looked ancient, unfamiliar, and they seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Jack hesitated for a moment, his heart racing. Every instinct in his body told him to turn around and leave, but something about the door drew him in. He took a deep breath and slowly approached the door. His hand trembled as he reached out and pushed it open. The door creaked loudly as it swung open, revealing a dark, narrow passageway beyond. Jack's flashlight flickered again, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The passageway was lined with old stone bricks, and the air inside was even colder than the basement.